This is day 5. It's called Tantra of the Heart. Okay, good morning. Here we go, another day. This is a fun day because it culminates, it brings everything together, which doesn't happen until almost the last minute. And then we're going to go out into the woods and do our final meditation, where at that point we should know everything and how to do it. But it'll be new to you, so I will lead you through it when we get out there. In the advanced workshop, if you come to that, I'm going to assume you know this stuff perfectly, and we're going to go beyond it, which is I love that workshop because of what happens in it. It's so cool. Anyway, I always have to look at my notes because I never know where I'm going or what I'm doing. So this day is called Tantra of the Heart, and we're going to talk in all kinds of ways, and not normal ways that you would normally not probably ever think about. We're going to talk about sexual energy and how it relates to spirituality. And it's the focus, because sexual energy is the key to creation. When you create anything, it's done with sexual energy. Though there is sexual energy in ways that you probably have never thought of before, even if you really sat and thought a lot about it. because it's just, we don't think of a lot of these things. There's actually sexual energy between the heart and the brain, and not in the way that we normally think, which doesn't involve the genitals at all. It's a totally different thing. But it's still sexual energy, and it's really powerful. So anyway, from our point of view, from Melchizedek's point of view in our study of the universe, every single thing that came into creation, and there are things that are constantly still being created, came in because of the union of opposites, of the coming together of the male and female that create that thing. Whether it's a planet or a galaxy or another universe or whatever, it's always the same thing. And so this is why we have to talk about this, because you could study spirituality, you can meditate forever, but if you don't get the sexual aspect or that's associated with it, you're wasting your time, because you'll never ever get there without it. I'm going to begin speaking about sexual energy through alchemy. And in my study of alchemy, it's very appropriate. And it'll also explain a lot of what's going on today. In the last, 50 years or so, there has been changes in sexuality, which I'm sure most of the world is aware of by now, that were not there before. They were there, but not in the way that they are now. And which has to do with homosexuality and bisexuality. And we're also going to talk about asexuality. Asexuality from a spiritual point of view is the highest form of sexuality, which is like no sexuality. But you can't achieve that by force, like the Catholic Church forces people to stop having sex, even when they're young, and being celibate, and it doesn't work, as they're figuring that out right now, I think. It doesn't work. The only way that you can achieve a sexuality is by going through all the possible sexual combinations, and that's the way that you arrive at it in a natural way. And there's a lot of them. We think that there's only just a few different kinds of sexuality, but there's actually 64. 64 entirely different, completely unique forms of sexuality, and it stretches through all forms of nature everywhere. not just humans, but everything that reproduces on every level of existence. And so we'll slowly get to all of that and explain it. But I want to begin with alchemy because it begins to explain another level of the reality that isn't really usually understood too much. In alchemy right now, there are two forms of alchemy that have been recognized. One is turning lead into gold, and the other is mercury into gold. And the reason that there has been so much time and energy put on this subject throughout history is because it's, again, as above, so below. And so there are layers to our reality. There's the atomic layer. And they continue on forever beneath that. They're looking for subatomic particles. It's an endless game. It never ends. And it's the other way too. Like it goes out forever also. And but on any layer, whether you're taking a cellular level, atomic level, a molecular level, etc., every level reflects every other level. And so when it comes to human consciousness, they've discovered a long time ago that if you go to a molecular level and you watch the way lead turns into gold, the precise procedure, the pH levels of as they're changing, the temperature levels, and all those things relate directly to human experience, going from human consciousness into a higher level of consciousness, sometimes called Christ consciousness or unity consciousness. It's just a name, but it's the next level of consciousness above human consciousness. So to go from here to the next level, if you're trying to understand it, you can just study the way lead goes into gold or the way mercury goes into gold. They're two different pathways, and you can understand it just by looking at that. You say, okay, I realize that coming up here is going to be an event where the temperature is going to rise tremendously, and you have to translate that into human consciousness and what that means, but you can actually see the whole thing. And so that was what was really going on. So they had to actually do it. They had to actually take the lead or the mercury into gold, and they had to see they were doing it, and then they would study the chemistry that was behind it. And it was one of the first things the angels had me do. They sent me to initially over about 70 teachers, and they did that by giving me their name, address, and phone number of people that I'd never even heard of before. Most of the time, some of them I knew, like Ram Dass I knew, and there were some that I knew, but about 3/4 of them I never heard of. But it's interesting when you just call a name and number you get from meditation, and it's that person, Hi. And they were always ready. They go, yeah, I know you're coming, come on over, The angel sent me to this person. His name was Will Chipman. And he was an alchemist. He was truly an alchemist. He was not just somebody thinking about it. And I studied with him for a little over 2 years, and he changed my life forever and ever and ever. And he used me as a guinea pig to study with some of his ideas, and they worked. It was very cool. And but after about a year, he lived in Burnaby, and for you in Canada, and outside of Vancouver in British Columbia, and he lived in a kind of a suburban area. Yeah, whatever it is, all those little boxes, they're all the same. And he lived in one of those, so if you're just driving down the road, it would look just like any other house. But after a year, one day he says, okay, now I'll show you my lab. And I've been going into his house every day for about a year, and I'm going, where's your lab, And he takes me over to a broom closet. It's like one of Steven Spielberg things. You go in there and he turns the handle, and the whole thing is an elevator, and it goes down it goes down on the ground. And it was way down on the ground. It was like about 100 feet into the ground. And And when we got down there was a lab about the size of this room, maybe a little bigger actually. And it had the finest equipment on Earth was in there. I mean, he had electron balances, and I mean, it was everything that you could. I mean, and this stuff was. He had millions of dollars in this room, and he brought me over to this sphere about so big. Looked like plexiglass, perfect sphere, sitting on a stand. So the sphere was about this high off the ground. It was on a stand. Don't know what was inside the stand. Some kind of motor. And it was in a greenish, yellowish liquid that was in there. And a little tiny bit of mercury would come out and form a sphere, and it would start rising at the bottom. And you could watch it, and it would go through all these different colors because it's going through transformation, it's going up. And when it get within about 2 inches of the top, it would turn into solid gold and drop to the bottom. And it did this all day and all night, so that's why he had all this money to buy all this equipment. And so he really did know how to do it, but he also he made the proper interpretations of the chemical reaction relative to human transformation. It was very good, and so I mentioned the other day that we have now discovered a third way. I'll say it again. There is now definitely, it's not a maybe. We know for certain there is another way, which is taking silicon into gold. And it is much cleaner, simpler, easier than the other ones. And I don't think that it has ever been done ever before in the world. If it has, it has been done secretly. No one, so it could have been, but it's never. I've never seen anything written about it. Has anybody here ever seen anything written about silicon into gold? I've never seen it either, but it's real. We have physically done it, and they've done it 20 times in Phoenix. They did it. Another lab did it 10 times in another independent lab, and we have done it twice here, and we're about to start back into it next week and then begin to study exactly what I'm talking about right now. That may take me a while because I don't know exactly what I'm doing, but there must be a reason why I'm being given this, you know. So I'm kind of excited about it, really. I like games and play. It's like a game, kind of, you know. And so I think it's kind of going to be a fun thing. Okay, so. So now that you understand about how as above, so below, and on a molecular level, that there are these 2, maybe 3 things that will translate human consciousness into higher consciousness, I want to bring it into a more general pattern, and that is that, and make a statement, that is that every single chemical reaction in existence relates to some life form somewhere. It's the entire thing. On every level, it relates to life in one way or another where we are now, on this level. And on other levels and everything. It's all things are together. And that's also true if you drop down further into the atomic levels. You go down another one below molecular level into the atomic levels. And the atomic reactions that take place are very basic. And they have very deep relationships with human life also, differently than the molecular levels, but they do. And so in order to explain this, I'm going to talk about stars. And stars, from everything I have learned and know at this point, are living beings. They are alive, they are conscious, they have personalities. They are people, just like us, but they are existing on another level of life. And so are planets. Planets and moons. Some moons are in the process of being born. And they're not quite into that conscious level, but they will be. And so, but looking just at the stars right now, or our sun, which is a star also, You look at the process. Stars are born. They're born from hydrogen clouds, which is the debris from a dying star. So when like a supernova goes wham and explodes, it puts out all this hydrogen, which then reforms into hundreds of new stars. So it's a form of reproduction. The death becomes the birth, which it always is. And those stars become born. They go through a procedure that is identical to the way that we are creating the Merkaba. It is exactly, step by step, exactly the same thing. And so we're doing what the stars do to bring our consciousness up, and they're doing exactly the same thing on another level. But if you look at it, it's precisely the same exact movement that we make when we perform the meditation of the Merkaba. And these stars go through various stages. Like our sun is a hydrogen sun. They always begin as a hydrogen sun. Hydrogen is the first element in the periodic table of thing. It's where it all begins, the very first element. And so a hydrogen sun it's always the same thing. It brings two hydrogen atoms together through fusion and creates helium, which is one octave above this. It makes a huge jump, really a huge jump when it goes from hydrogen to helium. And that is what produces the light that comes to this planet. Okay? Every scientist on Earth will tell you that all life on Earth came from the sun, literally. It is this light that comes from the sun, and all the radiation and pulses and everything else that comes here from it is what creates our life here. If the sun was not there, we would just be a rock in space. And so whatever happens on the sun influences us here big time, huge. Every time a solar flare goes off, another level of the cosmic DNA has been unfolded. It just keeps going. And it will be a solar flare probably that triggers ascension on this earth. It comes from the sun. And so, but it's more than that. It's in ways that we normally don't know, especially when you talk about sexuality, which is where we're going in all of this today. When the light that is arriving here on Earth is a hydrogen light, and it has a helium element to it, and that light determines how we come together as people in sexual relationships. You remember in the book we mentioned that the male aspect of our race, the father aspect of our race, we said was from Sirius, and the female aspect was the Nephilim from the planet Marduk, or Nibiru is another name for it. And so the Syrian family that came here, I mentioned, was 16 males and 16 females, and they were married. But what's interesting is that on that planet, which happens to come from Sirius B, there's 3 stars up there, A, B, and C, and they come from Sirius B, third planet out, just like this one, which is a near completely water planet. There's only one island on it about the size of California, and then one little tiny island, and that's it. So it's more water than anything. And on that planet, the people that are on that land, they only marry 16 males and 16 females. No other way. They would never dream of it. They wouldn't dream of it. 17 would be, oh my God, never do that. That's bad. Only 16 and 16. And so why? And you'll find if you go to other planets, there's very specific geometrical arrangements that are there, that the way people come together to make relationships. And when you go to a certain planet, you won't see anything else. It'll only be that and nothing else. And there's lots of these configurations. And we stay with it. On our planet, it has been one male and one female for a very, very, very long time. That's about to change forever. And we're in the process of doing that. It'll usually take about 50 to 100 years, and we're still probably at least 50 years away before it will click in, and we won't be here. So we're not going to be able to see this take place here. Probably. Who knows what life is going to do, but probably not. I don't think we're going to make it. But the reason we are one male and one female is because the hydrogen atom has one. Well, let me just make another statement first. If you go down below atomic level to there's a point where there's only three things in the universe, and that's the proton, electron, and neutron. And the proton is in the center. The neutron is also in the center, and an electron goes around it. If you want to accept the Bohr's understanding of the reality. But what's interesting is the proton has an atomic mass of whatever it is, I don't remember, and the electron has a much, much lower mass also. And the neutron is exactly the male and the female, the mommy and daddy. The proton is the male, the electron is the female, and the neutron is the child. And the child has the exact mass of its mommy and daddy. It is of a proton and electron, precisely. It's pretty interesting. And so if you see that as the proton is male, the electron is female, and the neutron is the child, this is the Holy Trinity again, emerging on a very, very low level, even below atomic level. And so the light that's coming from our sun is a hydrogen that has just moved into helium light, and it's the hydrogen component that determines how all life on this planet comes together. Pretty much. There are exceptions, and because that light is based on one proton and one electron and one neutron, that's what we do. We arrange ourselves in configuration with the light that's coming from the sun. It has so much influence on us, it's just crazy. But in 1972, and Bell Labs showed this, and it was so important because we've gone for about 5 billion years, depends on who you want to talk to. The sun has been doing this for about 5 billion years. But what happens is it's constantly making helium. And so the helium starts building up in concentration. And after about 5 billion years, that concentration of helium gets so strong that a new reaction begins. And the sun goes from a hydrogen sun to a helium sun. And we're just happen to be at that moment. There's a lot of moments that just happen to be right now. We're going from one kind of light to another. And so now, on August 7th of 1972, you had this blast of an expansion. We didn't get to see it all because the Syrians knew that we were not ready for this because we'd had an accident right prior to it on Atlantis, and we should have been in position to know how to deal with this, but we weren't. And so they helped us. But still, at any rate, what's emerged on Earth is that you have a brand new kind of light. It's when the helium triggers into the next stage of a sun's growth, it's 3 helium atoms coming together forming carbon. And so this light is a helium light, but it has a component of carbon associated with it to it. And so helium is 2 protons, 2 electrons, and 2 neutrons. Got to put another finger in there. And so what happens at that point is we go through a transformation. And this is the reason why homosexuality is emerging on Earth right now. Whether you like it or not, It's just what's happening, and you can't stop it because it's nature. It's what's going on. And so in the future, at some point, we're going to come together with 2 males and 2 females, and we will have 2 different kinds of children that come out of these relationships, and everyone will do only that, and they will never think of doing anything else. But we're not there for sure. But there is a transformation going on where women are getting together and men are getting together, but eventually they'll come together. It doesn't stay that way for very long. Eventually they come together, and because you can't reproduce. However, it is one way that Mother Earth can stop the overpopulation. The more there is of that, the less children there are. Less babies are being born. So it does have a positive aspect on that. I'm not promoting anything. I'm very happy with my wife. But I'm just saying that I'm not judging anything either. I'm just looking at it objectively of what's going on. And if we didn't have such a stigma associated with it, this would be easier to accept. But we don't. We do, and so it's just the way it goes. This light that's coming in now is changing not only sexuality or how we come together. That's just one thing. It's changing lots of things about us. This light really started to emerge about 150 years ago. It just reached a peak in that, and it's been transforming us slowly in all kinds of ways. We are not the same people who we were 400 or 500 years ago. There was a huge difference in who we are and how we think and everything. And it's the cosmic DNA unfolding through the light of the sun. The light of the sun is everything. It is simply everything relative to a planet. And the stars keep going. Eventually, if you were to wait a very long time, another few billion years, the carbon would begin to ignite, and then you would have carbon has 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. It's the 666, which is us. We're carbon-based life forms, and at that point, everything would transform over. It'd take about 100 years or so, and it would transform over, and we would come in with families of 6 males, 6 females. And there'd be 6 different kinds of children that would come from this relationship, and that's just the way it will be for sure if the sun were to last this long. And it continues on, and eventually the star dies, and there's different ways it can die. It can become the supernova that we just talked about, where it blows up and forms massive hydrogen clouds that form other suns. It can also go within itself and become a white dwarf and compress itself into this unbelievably compressed mass that is so heavy that if we just took 1 inch of it and set it gently on the earth, it would go right through the earth, right to the other side. It weighs so much. Nothing would stop it. And it would just go right through, and it would start oscillating back and forth, eventually end up in the center of the earth. It's incredibly heavy material. It's thousands and thousands. It's tons, actually, just in a small little piece of it. And that's kind of the basics, I think, of that. And it gets more complex because we're a single star system, which is very unusual. There aren't very many. Most star systems are 2 or more stars. Most of them are binary systems. I think that's the most thing. So there's 2 male components in the solar system. And like in Sirius, there's 3. And there's other ways for these stars to die. By the way, there's a couple other ways that it's possible. But they do go through a life and death process. Let me see. That is the reason why when you get more than one sun, and they're different ages, especially like what's going on in Sirius. Sirius A is the brightest star in the sky. It's a 4.6 magnitude, and it's the brightest star we can see. It's a big, huge star. But the Sirius B is a white dwarf, and it's a little tiny star and very weak in its output of light. And then you have a Sirius C, and I don't really know. They just discovered Sirius C not too long ago, and I'm not sure what that star is. But if you were coming from space and you wanted to know what the people were doing on these different stars, before you ever got there, you can analyze the suns that are in there and the kind of light that is coming from each one of those suns to the planets, and you can just calculate exactly how they come together. It's more complex to figure out than it is if it's just one. If it's one, it's really straightforward. But if it's two or three and different ages and different kinds, then it's more complex. But in that case, it was 16 males and 16 females. And they would be able to make 16 different kinds of children, uniquely different in how they perceive life. Okay, so that's the kind of the introduction. And I'm going to move this over here. Now I'm want to talk about human sexuality itself. And this does not apply to just humans. It applies to all forms of life everywhere. So you'll understand when we go through this, the complexity of the human sexuality. If you really want to study it in detail, read the I Ching out of China. The I Ching, some people say I Ching, but it's actually pronounced Yi Ching. It's the Book of Changes. There are 64 different hexagrams that move through this in a very specific order. The first order is all male lines. And by the way, it wasn't that way always. We're in the male cycle, and during the male cycle, one of the males changed it. It originally started out all female lines. And female is the basis at the beginning of things. But they didn't like that and reversed the whole thing. And to me, beginning with the female lines is more accurate. But it's what we got. It's still incredibly accurate when you there have been 3 medical doctors who have written books that I'm aware of, and they don't know about each other because I've talked to a couple of them. I actually wanted to discuss this with them, and they didn't even know that somebody else had written the book. But when you read read the 3 books, it is identical. It is so much identical. If they ever went into copyright court, they would have a really hard time because it looks like the other one stole it from the first one. But they didn't. They were just going purely from science and relating what they can see about the DNA to what they see about the I Ching. And it describes in detail, and I mean in minute detail, the human DNA. And it's so perfect, it could never have been just a guess or an accident. It's unbelievably accurate. And so it just shows you the power of what is behind this book. It's really amazing. And so you can also see where the polarities reverse. It goes from male to female, male to female, male to female. There's 32 male, 32 female, and they alternate every other one going through the whole thing. Each one of these different sexual polarities that they refer to in there are uniquely different than any other one. They're all completely different. And so if you really want to study human sexuality, look at what it says about each one of these different changes, and then you'll understand what the 64 human sexualities are in detail, and also how it relates to the DNA. But on a real simple level, I'm only going to talk about the first 8. And because I'm going to further talk about how the Egyptians feel about this and what they did about it. And they were only concerned about the first 8 because they superimposed something else over it, and I'll describe what that is. And it's interesting because it's another thing you kind of need to know. It helps to know it because it answers a lot of questions that are going on in life. I think I'll use the black one since it's easier to see. So I'm first going to lay out this pattern of how sexuality goes, and we will relate it to human sexuality, so it is in our language so we know what it means. If I did it with grasshoppers, it wouldn't quite be the same. But it is the same. But there is only one energy, just this single energy, and there's only one energy really in existence, and all the other forms of energy in physics all come from a single energy. And eventually that will be very clear. But most physicists suspect this is true anyway. And that one energy breaks into 2 basic patterns, which is male and female. A male and female energy. And then that energy breaks down further into, and I'm not going to make it into a tree. There's this 4, which we talked about before. The male, the female, the male and female, and the asexual or neutral. So you have these 4 basic energies that run through things, and you can see it in so many ways. You have a male component, a female component, you have both, and you have neither. And it's like in the nucleic acids in the DNA, which I mentioned also before. If there are 4 of these acids, and they combine to produce 64 different codons in the DNA. And those codons are, to me, they're like applications in a computer. We're only running on about 20 or 21, 22, something like that. And the rest of them that we have in our DNA are just sitting there not being used. The new children that are coming in have brought in 6 more. And they don't use all 6 of them. Each one chooses 2. So you have all these different kinds of, so all the indigo kids and everything, they're not the same. They're completely and uniquely different because it depends on which applications they chose. So it's just like a computer. If you stuck in 2 applications, well, it depends on what those applications do. If some other kids puts in 2 more and they're different, then it's going to be dependent on what they are. And so we have a lot of different combinations of what's possible. And so science has now determined, it's not just me saying this, that there are many, many, many children now with 2 more codons turned on in their DNA. And there are lots of changes, I mean, which we talked about in the books, where the indigo kids have a completely different stomach than we do, and a liver. They're able to eat junk food. They're made for it. Gimme Twinkies. I was talking to somebody else the other day. It's kind of like we're cockroaches. You know, if you give us bad enough stuff long enough, we want it. Good stuff. We just take it from the negative and into the positive, and if that's what it's going to be, then we're going to make it positive. And that's what we did. So they are able to digest and use food in a different kind of way than we can. Or at least I'm saying we. There's a lot of indigo people in this room, but anyway. So from these 4 basic patterns of male, female, both, and neither, there is a pattern that has developed, and I'm going to write it out. I'm just going to write the whole thing out and then talk about it because it takes a little bit. So it's a male-male, which we call heterosexual. A female-male, and we call that homosexual. There's a female-female, and that's heterosexual female. And then you have a male-female, which is a lesbian. A male bisexual, and that is a male bisexual. And then you have a female bisexual. Then you have a male asexual and a female asexual. Computer graphics would be so much quicker. So you have these 8 basic patterns that come. It goes from 1 to 2 to 4 and then to 8. It then goes to 16 to 32 to 64. And so the polarity continues, but I'm not going to continue with it. So like with a male heterosexual, there's also, on the next level, it becomes a passive and an active one, which is like male and female. And that passive and active runs all the way through here. So the same way with homosexuals, there's a passive and active homosexuals, etc., all the way through this whole thing. And even with asexual, it still has this balance between male and female, even though they're not sexually active. If you continue with it and you keep breaking it down and you go through this whole thing, you can come up with all 64, and then you can relate that to the I Ching, and you'll see. Then you can go right specifically what each one is inside of there, and then you can study it in great detail. I'm just not going to do it, but you can do it if you want. I need to go this far because I want to talk about the Egyptian part of it. This, by the way, let me see if I have it on here. Okay, no, I'm going to wait just a moment. But we're going to talk about nature in a minute, because this is throughout nature, everywhere. It doesn't stop with humans. It's with every single life form that moves or breathes on Earth. And the Egyptians were very much into this, and their ideas of Tantra are uniquely different than anybody else that I've seen. If you look at the Tibetans or the Hindus, their concepts of Tantra are one way. You look at the Chinese, like through Mantak Chia and his work, and they're more interested in the flow of the energy, of how it moves and everything. Whereas the Egyptians have got the flow primarily down to a single movement, which is the Ankh. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But their concepts of Tantra are more interested in something else. And in order to talk about it, I got to explain it, because it is different. But it's kind of important to know this, because if you do it, you'll see it'll answer a lot of things that are going on in life. The Egyptians believe that you're not a human being fully until you've had 8 lifetimes. 8. And after you've completed the 8th lifetime and you go into your 9th lifetime, then you're a fully developed human being. And the reason is because they discovered a long time ago that with the star tetrahedron, when you come in, you have to come in as a male or a female. You have to choose one. It doesn't really matter, but you have to choose one. So if you choose a female, it's going to, the configuration around you is going to be with this point forward. If you choose a male, it's going to be this one forward. But at the end of your lifetime, your first lifetime, you've developed a personality over that through the environment you're in, the family you're with, the friends you know, and things that happen. You create and develop a personality. And but then when you die, you can't be female again. You have to be male to keep the balance, because if you do 2 male or 2 female in a row, your life here is over here. It will throw you out off the earth. and you can't do it. You have to become male or the opposite that you did on the first one. So if you were female the first time, then you're male the second time. And when you do, you're going to be somewhere else, a different family, different place on earth, somewhere else, and you're going to develop a brand new personality, and it's going to be male. So your sexuality will be different, but so will be everything else. The foods you like, the colors you like, the music you like, everything will be different. Then on your third life, it must be female again, and you choose another one. And you switch not to the ones that now have personalities built on it, but you choose one of the other ones, and you come in with another female, and you develop another personality, female. And then you go to a male, and you keep going until they're all completed. And this rotates too. That's another thing we've never talked about. But where we say that you got one going this way and one going this way, and you have one that's fixed, you can move the fixed one under certain conditions, and it has to do with the orgasm. It's the only moment when you can move it. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. And so after 8 lifetimes, you've developed 4 male and 4 female lifetimes. Again, relating to the I Ching. The I Ching is based on a cube rather than a star tetrahedron, but it's the same thing. A star tetrahedron is a cube, if you turn it this way. And so they see it as a cube, or we're looking at it as a star tetrahedron, but it's the same thing. And so they in the I Ching, the whole thing is, if you read before you get into it, it's all based on the mother, the father, the 3 sons, and the 3 daughters. That is the basis of the I Ching. And it's exactly what they're talking about in China is the same thing that they were talking about in Egypt. That you have 4 or 8 personalities, 4 male and 4 female. And that's who you are. But when you're in one of these lifetimes, you don't know about the other ones. They're hidden to you. You don't know they're there. You're just living that one that you're in. But you have 7 other distinctly, uniquely different personalities than the one that you have right now. And if you've been here for 8 lifetimes. I've only been here, this is my 2nd lifetime, so I only have 1. I was a female the first time. I have 1 developed now, and now I'm on the 2nd one. And so I'm not considered human yet by the Egyptians. I haven't lived here long enough to get that distinction from their point of view. And and so they all of their understanding of ascension, which was primarily based on resurrection, not on ascension. Resurrection came from that the Christians are using came out of Egypt, and it's really clear if you study it. It was not delivered by Jesus. It was long before him that this was the information that he was putting out was around resurrection was already established in Egypt, and he was completing it. The Egyptians knew that Jesus was coming, and they knew what he was going to teach, and they were actually preparing for it. They prepared 500 BC. They were already aware that Jesus was coming 500 years in the future. They were very good at knowing what was coming in the future. But anyway, I don't want to get into that too much. But and so, what happens in the Egyptian way of perceiving not just sexuality, but spirituality and consciousness, that they would go through the left eye of Horus, they'd go through the right eye of Horus, and at which each one was 12 years. And then there was 3 years after that where they studied what we're talking about now. Now they began to study this at Komombo, the 2nd chakra, or the temple there. They studied sexuality. But it continued. The idea of sexuality continued through all the schools because it's so basic to everything. And at the very end, what they would do is they would take a person who was a candidate to go into the Great Pyramid and be one of those that would go into the heavens and become the heavens and come back and be an immortal being. That person was subjected to an interesting thing, and we've done this in a mystery school we used to have for a while. I did this with 2 or 3 people. I don't remember, but it was at least 2 people that we did this with, and I watched what happened, and it was amazing. I don't recommend you try this at home. Probably not a good idea. You'll never be the same if you do. After a person has reached a certain level of awareness, then what they do is they do a ceremony and a procedure that you become aware of all of your 8 personalities at once, simultaneously. They all come forth at once in your one body. And they share information with each other. So they're sharing all their wisdom and knowledge, and they're bringing it all into one place. And so when you step into the Great Pyramid, in that point there, you are not normal human being. You have absorbed and brought in all the various levels of yourself. This procedure, when they do it, how they do this, is that they're breathing through their Merkaba field and the whole thing, and they're aware of this, and then and they're using sexual energy with their Merkaba in a very specific way, which will slowly unfold here as we go. But in this particular ceremony, what they do is and it takes a few days to do it. At the moment of orgasm, when it comes up, they ankh the energy, which we'll talk about it again in a little bit. But you have 8 breaths, exactly from the first moment that the energy comes up your spine. You have 8 breaths to do this in. After that, it's not usable anymore. And during that time, through intention, you can turn your tetrahedrons to any other point. And if you do that, that personality emerges out of the body and the other one recedes away. And so suddenly, if you were female and you did this energy coming up and you transformed it and you turned it to a male, you're now male. You might be in a female body, but you are male. And you have male sexuality, you have male and whatever that male's ideas, understandings, wisdom, desires, and all those things that create the personality, that's who you are now. And so they slowly move through all of them, which also means rotating it over this way to the top to get to those other ones, so they're coming forth. And so these different personalities, one by one, come out. And then they do this thing after each one has come out. You've rotated through all of them. And once they've right in sequence after each other, one male, one female, one male, one female, and they do this whole thing. There is this way which I don't quite understand, but I've seen it happen, but I haven't experienced it, so I don't quite understand it. But they all come out at once, and they're all in you at once, and they all can communicate at once. And it is the final step before going into the Great Pyramid. So I just wanted you to understand that you have this aspect to yourself, and sometimes it does come out, and especially during sexuality, because sometimes people turn these things by mistake. And because it only takes intention, and if you're a female and all of a sudden you are in a sexual fantasy as being male, and you do it just in and just happens to be the right way to turn one of these things, it can become permanent. You know? Yeah, oops. No, it's oops. It's just so you have the understanding, but it takes a lot of knowledge to be able to do this properly, and you can't do it by yourself. You have to have external people that are watching you go through these stages and guiding it. It's not. It's more complex. But what they did, they knew that this was true. They knew about these 8 personalities. So did China know about the 8 personalities? And what the Egyptians did was they took the 8 personalities and they combined it with the first 8 of these, producing 64 different types of connections with their 8 personalities, which was, this is not conforming to nature. This is something that they created. And they used it in their schools. Nature just simply keeps going on with the polarity down to 64 different possibilities, but they combined the 2, did that, and linked them together. And so I don't know. It may be that they had these 8 personalities linked with these 8 different sexual polarities. I don't know that. What happened with me is I was studying Egyptian Tantra with Thoth and his wife, and for years, and I got about a little more than halfway through it, and then the Ascended Masters made this decision that they were all going to leave and go do this thing where they went into space and time and dimension and made the journey that we're going to make. And that was in about 1996 or so. And they were gone, I think, for 6 years. And so I just stopped, and then I didn't get the rest of it. And then 6 years, in approximately 2002, I was sitting in my office, and I just suddenly was pulled over to Thoth's picture, and I was looking at it, and Thoth came in. I hadn't seen him in 6 years. And he came in, and he was not the person I knew before. He was transformed. Where before he was an incredibly intense person, and his name as before Thoth was Chikutet Arlich Vomalites, and Chikutet is a title. It means the seeker of wisdom. And well, he wasn't seeking anything anymore. Whatever had happened in this movement through all these levels and coming back is that you could tell he was calm. He was not looking anywhere. He was just doing his job, but he wasn't. He had been transformed by that journey, and so all he did was come in and say, "I'm back," and told me that half of them had come back and stuff like this, some basic things. And he says, "I'll be back later." And then I didn't, and so his whole moment with me was maybe 3 minutes, and then he was gone. And then about 2 weeks later, he came back with his wife, Shizat, and we had a long talk then about what had happened and all the kinds of things that were going on. And then he said that he was too busy to complete it, but he left his wife, Shizat, with me to complete the tantric school. But she did it at high speed. You know, I mean, it was like in about 2 weeks. She stayed with me for about 2 weeks, and was not the same as what was before, where it was very slow and understanding. So I kind of got it, but I have not a perfect understanding. I don't think of everything. I just realized right now I'm not sure why they did this, and I'm beginning to see why they did it as I'm looking at it right now, but I still don't know for sure. So anyway, this is one of the schools, one of the Egyptian schools, mystery schools. The other thing I'm going to switch subject again, and that is to talk about this in terms of nature. If you really want to look at it and study it, you'll see that this sexuality, and then with all the other changes that are, all the other polarity divisions that go below it, are throughout nature. We mentioned before the one about bees, how not only do we have all these polarities with it, but we use different mathematics to reproduce with. The human beings are using a binary sequence, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, which is based on this. But the bees, which we just gave you one example, they start out at 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 24, 30, 21, 34, 55, 89, etc. And that's Fibonacci in nature. So the bees have a different geometry behind how they create their reproduction, but they still have this moving through. Everything has this moving through it. And so every life form has a different geometry. And lots of them use binary, lots of them, the two primary ones are binary sequence and Fibonacci sequence. There may be others. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if there are other ones, and especially other dimensions in other places. There are also what we mentioned, how in our relationship you have to have one male and one female to make a baby, but that's not completely accurate. That's how we think about it, but science now knows. We mentioned it in the other book. Females can make babies without males. And science can just do that. They can just go in and just take a little thing and poke a hole in the ovum and stimulate it, and it'll produce a baby without it ever having sex or anything. And then there's also another way where they can do that, which is interdimensional sex. This is another thing. In interdimensional sex, you can get pregnant just by yourself, having sex, but connected to at the same moment with another being on another level of existence. And this is your immaculate conception. And immaculate conception has now been proven scientifically as fact. It can take place. But not just with humans. I mean, you have like geckos, these little lizards. There's, which we also mentioned in there, but you could go on for the rest of your life searching these things out. There's female geckos that don't have any males. There are no males in them at all. They're all female. But they have babies on their own, and it's always a female. So, where does that fit into the ideas of where things are? But we were asked to do all possibilities. That's just one of the primary instructions from the source, is to try all possibilities. And definitely that's a possibility. And it is true. It is fact on Earth. They've studied seagulls. And there's been this big study back in the 1990s, and they discovered that worldwide, 14% of all seagulls are lesbians. It's just fact. They don't like guys, they just like each other, and that's the way it goes. And then there's, in the tree form, I'm just using this one, there's papaya trees. And in Australia, not here, but in Australia, the papaya trees are male and female, which they are all around the world. But in Australia, they have male papaya trees, female papaya trees, and bisexual papaya trees that don't need other trees. They can do it all by themselves. And in the stores in Australia, you can buy normal papaya and you can buy bisexual papaya, and it says so. Bisexual papaya trees. They taste different. The world's making a really big deal out of this, and I don't think it's such a big deal. You should just be whatever you are, and just forget it. The Native Americans, this is one thing, I've been with lots of these guys, and all of them that I'm aware of they don't care what your sexuality is, just whatever it is, great. They don't even care. It's not even an issue with them what it is, just, you are what you are, and that's the way it goes. And however, your sexuality can change. And again, if you're male and you turn your thing over to female, well, guess what? You're now female. But you could actually turn it again to come back to a male again. But if you don't turn it back to the same male and you turn it to another male, you're a different male. Your wife might understand that or see that it happened. Totally different thing. And this happens all the time, and people think they're crazy when it happens. And so therapists are always trying to figure out, multiple personalities. Multiple personalities could be simply that they've opened up 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these different things, and that's all it is. Or it could be an entity inside of you speaking through them, and which is a completely different thing than that. And you have to determine which one is it, and it's pretty easy to determine that. It only takes about 3 or 4 minutes, and you can know exactly what's going on. You can't kick out a personality. You cannot remove the personality. It's going to stay there no matter what you do, and that person can't change it either. And so they can, but more than likely not. And so they just have to get used to living with more than one personality inside of them. It's like Tara, the United States of what's that? The United States of Tara. It's so funny because what she's projecting is closer to this, of different personalities that are emerging out of her that are actually just personalities and not some kind of entity that's in her. Though it's possible, it could even be a combination of both. Life is very complex. Now, the other thing is that I want to put to you for contemplation, put it that way, is that there is only one source of energy in the sexual thing, in the sexual world, but that energy is at the base of the spine, is where it is. It's in the base chakra, and but how you perceive it depends on what channel it's coming up the body. There's 5 channels. And that's in the book. If you go back in the first book, you'll see them. And they rotate at 90 degrees as they move around. But if it comes up one of the channels, that's called a sexual orgasm. If the same energy comes up another channel, it's called a kundalini experience. And if that same energy comes up another channel, there's right now we're only functioning on 2 of these channels, and we are at this moment opening up a 3rd one, which has to do with an orgasm that is generated from the heart, not from any other procedure. It's a heart orgasm. And there's 2 more that are in the future. We can't access those yet. We're not old enough. But we will eventually. But the heart orgasm is now a potential on Earth. And some of you may have experienced this if you're doing this work, because if you're in your heart and you're going back and forth between your heart and your brain, your heart and your brain, eventually what happens is the toroidal fields that are created through the heart, those 2 fields that we showed you that are generated from here, are off-center from your Merkaba, or your axis of your spine. And when you have this orgasm, which is more intense than a sexual orgasm and far more intense even than a kundalini experience, and lasts about 20 minutes. When I experienced this, I thought I was dying, really, because I couldn't explain it to myself in any other way. I didn't know what was going on here, because it just kept going on and on and on, and it never stopped. And and what happens is, at the end of that, the heart toroidal fields move over to the heart chakra, align with the other toroidal fields from your Merkaba field, and they phase lock, which means that you are now permanently in your heart. There's no going back and forth anymore. You're there. It's forever at that point. And so that's a possibility, and probably everyone's going to experience this at one point or another. I don't know if it ever happens more than once, because I've only experienced it once. And it may be a one-time thing only. It appears to be true. Once this field is moved over, it takes 20 minutes for that thing to move over and phase lock with the Merkaba, but once it does, that's it. And experientially, what happens is everything starts becoming transparent. And you can see right through walls. It's pretty interesting, actually. You can see right through walls, and you see the stuff on the other side, but then everything starts becoming transparent. And then the energy gets really intense, and it becomes white like this paper. It becomes a very white, opaque. You can't see through it at all. And that lasts for a good 15 minutes. And that's where I was like, it's like being blind. You can't see, only it's white instead of black. And that's what was scary to me. So if that ever happens to you, just go, oh, well, I remember, I know, just relax and get behind it and have fun. I was really kind of concerned. And once it happens, though, it changes everything. And it's really hard to explain this right now, but my essence, my spirit is in my heart at this point now, and that's where I reside. And I've learned how to look through these eyes and function out here, but I'm still not really here. I'm really somewhere else. And it just happens. You don't have to do anything. It's just what happens. It's just the result. And a lot of people that have been through this, usually the only thing they want to do is stay in meditation. And so you get a lot of people that are living in these caves that just sit there. Actually, if you totally go all the way with this, you break the bonds with gravity, and you float off the ground about this far, and you glow. Your head glows, but your whole body glows with light, and then life uses you to. They're the dreamers that keep everything in balance, and we have people in the world right now. There's 400 or 500 of them, and if it wasn't for them, we would have crashed and burned a long time ago. They're the one. Without them, we would not be in this room for sure right now. So I really appreciate their existence. But my purpose had to be completed, so it's hard for me to do this. It's easier for me to. I would love to just stay there. That's my desire, is to stay there, but I can't. I have to complete this. So they've shown me this way to do this. And okay. Now once we get this information, then we're going to turn this into reality. I'm not just giving you a bunch of stuff to do. We're going to actually do what we're about to say here in a little bit. I now would like to go over and explain how you create from your heart. This is pretty important. Over here, we have the creation from the brain, which I could put up here. So it's, and maybe juxtapose the two together. This one we saw, that's the one we're suggesting you don't do, but probably you will try it anyway, so That's the way it goes. But the other one is how to create from your heart. And I want to make this really clear of what we do with this. So this is creating from the heart. And I'll just run through it quickly and then we'll discuss it. But the heart does not have a thinking process. It's not a brain. It doesn't think. What it does is it creates images. And it's an image world. And so it begins with dreaming or images. The whole process of creating from there, that's where it starts from. And it's not, so it has nothing to do with thinking, and it has absolutely zero to do with logic. It doesn't have anything to do with that. This is a world where you can be, it's just like when you're dreaming. You can be dreaming that you're in Italy, and the next day you're in Australia, or next second you're in Australia. And, well, how did you get there? What flight did you take? Or, there's no logic. You just think, and you're there. And that is the nature of this place. It is not, it's natural. It's part of the way it is. And what triggers the dreams, begins to move them into reality is, again, not logic, but it's emotions and feelings. It's emotions and feelings that are what begin to pull these images from the heart out into this outer world. Then it begins to come closer to what this one is. So the source is different, but then you come back to attention. But I'm going to write this, attention or not. Different than that. This one requires attention. This one here, you can either use attention and intention like you did over there. In other words, you can specifically get an image in your heart and purposely pull it into existence, or not. In this state of consciousness, you can simply surrender to the source of life and let yourself be a vessel where the source of life chooses what images and they will come through you. I definitely recommend in the beginning that you try the or not side. Just see how it works and let God bring them out. But it's not a bad thing. You can't do any harm. It's okay to use intention, but you don't have to. If you don't want to be the one to choose what changes are made in the world, you can allow the source of life, or Mother Earth. You can give it to Mother Earth, and she can do it. And there's a lot of people, that's all they do. They don't use their ego, they don't think, they don't do anything. They just become a channel. They became totally connected to the earth and to life. They stay in their heart all the time, and they just let these images that in their meditation, the dreaming state of the meditation, come forth out into the world. You can't cause harm, because where this is generated by ego, that's doing this thing over here, there's no ego here, and when you're in this space, and the heart, whenever it pulls, even if you ask for something to happen or if you don't, the heart will give it to you or bring it into the world, but it will not cause any harm at all. It's just amazing that it has that kind of intelligence, that he could figure out how to do something without causing any negative reaction anywhere in the universe at all. It's the intelligence that would take to do that is just astounding. But it is true. It will not do it. So again, you can bring this down like you do on this one over here to intention. Intention, T-I. Intention or not, because it's the same thing. You're either going to put your intention on a particular thing, and then you're going to use your intention, say, I want this, whatever it is, to happen. I want to heal my mother. I want to help someone or whatever. And you can either do that, you can come down this side, or you can just leave it up to God. And then what brings it into reality is a very interesting process. And this process is somewhat complicated. It's much more complicated than this. And it's going to sound a little strange at first, but what actually does it, it begins with the tip of your tongue and alpha waves. I know this is little, you'll have to, if you want to come up later, you can photograph it and get it. What this says is the tip of your tongue and alpha waves. What does that mean? Why does the tip of the tongue have anything to do with anything? And what's alpha waves? Okay, I'm going to have to talk about this for a moment to get you to understand. You have a question? Yeah. Well, we have to get the. Oh, okay. We'll get you in just a moment. Okay, go ahead.
Can you tell us which ones of the 5 channels connected to the 3 orgasms?
I'm not certain of that. I was going to do that research, and almost for certain, the sexual orgasm is associated with one of the, starting from the front, is one of the first 2, and you have the. If you're looking at a female, you're looking at the clitoris, then the opening of the vagina, then the perineum, then the anus, and then the tip of the spine, and those are your 5 openings. And with the male, the clitoris is just related to the penis. And there's an opening inside the male testicle sac. And more than likely, it's the first 2, the clitoris and the penis, and it makes a very wide swing. There's a straight line, then there's 2 that go like this, and then there's 2 more that are very much wider that move up through the whole thing, each one passing through each chakra, but with a wider swing. He was wanting to know which channels were associated with which one. I haven't done that research. I'm not positive. I didn't really care. But if you want to know, you just do the research and find out. I don't really know.
The second question related to the connection to the heart. If you try to teach someone to do that and he's already very much in his heart, it might be that the way to enter that, the field will not be on the heart itself, will be on the center?
The center is the heart chakra, and that is definitely a way to enter into the heart. But for some reason, the angels that I'm working with told me not to use this way. And I don't know why. I just followed them right now. But for sure, absolutely for certain, this is a direct entryway in to the heart.
I mean, if someone had the process you described of having the heart orgasm and the field moves, you can see that the field will be always in the center?
That's exactly where it moves from. The field moves from the physical heart over to the heart chakra, and then aligns with all the rest of the fields that are aligned with the chakra system.
And it will stay there?
It does stay there, yes. Doesn't leave. That's how you could tell if somebody's permanently in their heart or not. If you had the machine, if you had the equipment, you can see these fields. We know how to do it, and the Russians know how to do it. They've done it, and we in the United States have probably done it, and I'm not sure about anyone else. But China is probably right behind there. They've probably done it also. But it's really expensive. I mean, the average guy can't run around and make this kind of equipment because it's so expensive to look at a field that is only 4 degrees Kelvin. It's hard, and it's expensive to do it. And so we had a very inexpensive way of doing it where we could just we could map point by point by point, but we couldn't lay out all the points and see the whole field at once. So we had to, every time we wanted to see something, we can go into a certain point and we could prove it if it was there or not. But to see all the possible points, it was way too expensive for us to do.
Thank you.
My question, I just need a little bit more clear on the emotion or feeling part and just how, I guess, those first 2 steps compare and contrast from the brain and the heart.
These?
Yeah.
Well, okay. The brain is a thinking process machine, and it uses logic, and then it begins, that's where the process of how you try to create something, that's where it begins. This begins, when you're in the heart, it's an imaging field. And so when you go in there, once you ask for light, you just start seeing all these images. It isn't a thinking process, it's an imaging process, and you'll see all these images. And then, and when an image comes up that you have an emotional response to, or you have feelings that come up around physically and etc. in yourself, that's what separates all the various possible images from, you choose one basically by your emotional response to it. But once you feel this image, and this is the image that you, through your feeling body and your emotional body, that you want to exist in the world, that's where you begin from. That's when you say, your attention goes there, your intention is, yes, I want that to happen, and here's how you do it, which we're going to talk about in a minute.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can you invite the image, or it has to be an image that shows up?
Yes, you can invite the image. You can control that too. But the image must be there in the heart. If you can't find the image, you can't do it. But you can create the image. But it's, once you get into this, it's like no one even knows it's happening. It's so easy and so simple. But you can solve all of your problems from here. You can solve all forms of healing, period. You can gain weight, lose weight, bring money to you, get jobs, find people you want to have mates, etc., and everything, simply by being in your heart without ever leaving your bedroom. And I've done it so much now that it's just like, wow, this is, why work? This is easy. You know, and it's okay on top of that. It's okay. It is your birthright. You are a creator. And it's okay to do it. It's just that if you do this way, which involves ego, it's dangerous. It's really dangerous, not only to you, but to other people and everything. This should be illegal. You know, it should not be used. But it is a possibility. That's why when they put The Secret out, I went, oh my God, they're going to emphasize this. I can't believe it. You know, I was really shocked. And we should make another DVD on this, you know, so people understand. But I guess that's what we're doing kind of right now. So I think you understand this and this, but now we need to explain this. And this this little piece right in here is what traditionally in Hinduism, it's really related to Kundalini yoga and also to Kriya yoga that Yogananda was teaching. They're extremely related. And traditionally, to understand how to do this last little piece took 20, 30, or 40 years. I'm going to try to translate this into modern day words and images and understanding so that you can do it now, today. And I will, traditionally I'm able to get about 30 to 40%, and then the rest of you, it will just maybe take a little bit longer, but you'll know exactly how to do this before you leave here. I mean, exactly, not kind of or maybe or what this, but you're going to know exactly how to do this. It's my job. And so I hope I can do this the best I can. I'm going to try the best I can, and hopefully I'll get better and better at it. So I'm going to take this one off, and I'm going to put it over the top of this one. and then we're going to come over to here. So there's this tip of the tongue and alpha waves. I'm going to just go through the description of it first, and then we'll go through it on images up here very clearly, but just to give you an overview. And what I'm about to say is nothing new except in the way that I'm saying it. But it's been around forever. And it was talked about in the Vedas, it's talked about in Korea and Kundalini yoga for sure, and other schools also in different ways. The Great White Brotherhood also taught this, and so did, and Egyptian schools also did too, and I'm sure they did in China and other places also. But and Japan also knows all of this information. In fact, they really know it, but they've been keeping it secret. They told me, a lot of the Japanese don't know this, but there is a king and the queen to the Shinto. They're kept secret and hidden. But I had a meeting from them through the emperor, and when we discussed, what we were discussing was the sacred geometry that was released, and they have all that geometry. They know it all, and they know all this stuff that we're talking about. And their intention is to release this information to the Japanese people at the right time. And I thought that right time would have happened by now, but it still hasn't happened. But they definitely do know this. So anyway. Here's the procedure. You have normally the Merkaba field is not there, and that's what we're about to do, is we're going to reverse. So you guys are coming backwards down through here. You're coming from the Merkaba field to the beams of light, and then we're coming down into the heart, where we were in yesterday. But normally you start in the heart and go the other way. Well, that's what we're going to do now. We're going to, now that we've got the beams of light and we've got this other stuff, and we're in the heart, we're now going to go backwards, which is forward, actually. And we're going to reconnect the heart back to the brain and reset up the wiring inside of it so that it doesn't function through ego. And and so how you do that is and you have to first find the tiny place, which we're going to do today. We're really, when we do this one out here, out in the woods, it'll be your first time of going through it all. So you're probably going to have a lot of questions afterwards and everything, but I still wanted to get your first time connected to the earth and everything. It's just better. And some of you will have to practice this, in fact, almost all of you will have to practice this to get good at it. But, okay, you got your Merkaba, you got your beams of light, and you're in your heart. And you're in the tiny place of the heart. what you then do is you're watching the images, and an image appears that your emotional body responds to, and you want this image to be real. Or you have created the image through your intention, and now you want this image to be real. You want to bring it forth. What you do is a little complicated, but this is the procedure. You begin with the tip of the tongue on the roof of the mouth, and there's a very specific place you rub it. If you could be rubbing it for 10 years in the wrong place and nothing will happen, and that happens all the time. You got to be really precise, and we'll go into that in a moment. But if you do get exactly, and next thing is, why the tip of the tongue? Remember when we talked about how creation of a baby begins with an ovum and goes through all those various steps we were talking about through the star tetrahedron, and 512 cells, it forms a toroidal field, and then it becomes a heart. And then we talked about how the body came out of the heart. What is the first thing that comes out of the heart? Yeah, it could have been the fingers, the brain, or the legs, or something else like that. It's literally the tongue is the first thing that emerges out of the body. This is scientifically documented. It's true. It's the first thing. And so you can intuit right from there that there's a link between the tongue and the heart. But it's more than that. I don't have the name of it right now, but there's a sac that goes around the heart, comes up here, comes up through the throat, and that sac ends in your tongue. And so there's a physiological direct connection between the heart and the tongue. It's not just an arbitrary thing. And if you want to study it, you'll see that this is really true. And so when the tongue is functioning, this is going to sound strange, the tongue actually becomes a penis. The heart becomes male rather than female, and it turns the brain, which is normally male, into female. It reverses polarity. And the penis isn't just going anywhere. On the roof of your mouth is the vesica piscis, which we'll show you in a little bit, and at the very back of the roof of the mouth, in a very specific spot, you have a clitoris. Honest to God. You might not know it because it doesn't feel there. Now, some people have a hole at that exact spot. How many people have a hole in the back of their mouth? Just one person? It's usually more. It's usually about 8 or 9% or so. Huh?
Indented?
You actually have it's either an indent or an actual hole there. Yeah. Huh?
A hole or a valley?
Well, it could be a valley, but some people have a hole so deep that they can't find the end of it. It's where the bones come together and they don't quite seal, and that happens to be the exact spot where for other people there's a clitoris. If you have an opening, you do a slightly different thing. We'll talk about it, but it will still work just as fine. And if for the rest of you, it's flat there right now. But if you take your tongue, you know when you make a clicking sound, you like that? Okay. Well, now just don't make the sound. And only when you pull your tongue in there, suck it, pull the roof of the mouth down. Just don't make the sound, but just pull it down. And what'll happen is a little bump will form. Right back there. And when you start massaging that bump, it swells up. And it's a clitoris. It literally is a clitoris. And after about 20 minutes, it becomes really swollen, and it's totally excited at that point. But what that point is connected to goes up through here and comes up and is directly connected to the thalamus glands. It's a gland, but it's two pieces, and it looks kind of like eggs, and they're kind of big. And those two, and this is work that I did with Dr. James Hart. He is a brain researcher, PhD in physics and a PhD in psychology, and he's one of the primary researchers in the world for brains and their. I mean, this guy knows more about brains than just about anybody alive. And he's up in Canada, in British Columbia. But he's building these things I'm about to talk about all over the world right now. They just finished one in Germany, I think. They're building one in Russia. Dr. James Hart, H-A-R-D-T. He's German.
Where's the pump located that you feel?
What?
Where's the pump located?
Where's the what located? Oh, the bump. Well, let me just give you an overview first, and then we'll go in detail and tell you exactly where it is and describe it precisely. But I'm just to give it an overview right now. What? Oh, it's 11 o'clock. And we're right at the clitoris.
Keep going!
Oh, God, that's horrible. I don't know. That was Diane, though. She's the mommy. Okay, well, I still need almost a half an hour to do this, so let's take the break, and then and just stay excited. And we'll be back at 11:30.